Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Security Repo podcast. In this episode, we're going to be touching on a subject that's really been affecting everyone lately, and that's remote work, particularly remote development environments. Since the pandemic, nearly everyone has gone remote. And even though that pandemic is hopefully in the past, a lot of people aren't returning back to the work. So what security implications does working from anywhere actually create? And more importantly, what can we do about it? This is the exact topic that we're going to be covering with the next guests on our podcast. Vedran and Tomma are from Codeanywhere. Codeanywhere is a cloud integrated development environment. But that, as you're about to find out, means a whole lot more than just moving Visual Studio or whatever IDE you use into your browser. And it introduces some security benefits that are particularly relevant in this new remote work world. Today, we are joined by two guests. First is Vedran, the CTO and co-founder of Codeanywhere. He started working on this company alongside with their CEO and co-founder Ivan 12 years ago, and they were the first in the cloud development environment market. So they really have experience doing this long before anyone would have predicted the pandemic to happen. And while Codeanywhere has really made some leaps and strides, they are still working to bring their absolute vision into reality. Vedran is joined by Tomma, who is a very impressive individual, and at the young age of just 22 is one of the lead developers and in charge of all the business-to-business integrations at Codeanywhere. But don't let that young number fool you. Tomma is filled with amazing knowledge that far surpasses his age, and if I'm completely honest, makes me feel quite inadequate. But without further ado, I want to dive straight into the conversation with myself, my co-host Dwayne McDaniel, Tomma, and Vedran.
I think everyone listening to this has some familiarity with local development environments and getting your local spun up. That's not what y'all do. You're from Codeanywhere. Why don't you just give us a very high level overview of what is Codeanywhere? Or just
Yeah, sure. So Codeanywhere started as basically a browser ID 12 years ago, I think, and Vedran here is the CTO and co-founder of Codeanywhere, and his idea basically was to just allow anyone to code anywhere. So you could connect via FTP or SSH into your basically production servers and then just code using the browser ID. But their vision was basically to allow anything you want to be coded in the cloud. And their vision actually shifted a bit because it's now isn't just a browser ID, and the browser ID is just a commodity, would say. The main power behind our platform is the actual cloud development environments, because cloud development environments allow you to actually run any kind of code in the cloud, and you can connect to that cloud development environment via any ID that can support SSH. So, for example, JetBrains IDs and VS Code out of the box support SSH connections. And the browser ID is just there for convenience, would say. So we don't really rely so much on the browser, let's say, programming component, but we actually emphasize the power of your code running in the cloud and the security basically of your code running in the cloud.
I want to dig into something you said out there, because I think that's a little bit of confusion in the market right now. You made a distinction between a cloud development environment and a cloud IDE. What, can you define that a little bit better?
Yeah, sure. So it actually is one of the main, I'd say, blurry lines between just a cloud ID and the cloud development environment. So the ID part of it is just the interface. It's just an ID with, I don't know, File Explorer, type in your code, and that's it, save a file. And the cloud development environment part of it is where the actual code lives and where it's executed. So the difference being is that you could have a browser-based ID connected to your local file system, I guess. But the cloud-based development environment is much more powerful in a sense that you can have any code executed remotely in the cloud environment but as I said, the cloud or browser-based ID is a commodity in a sense that you don't need it to code in the cloud development environment. You could also code, as I said, in JetBrains and VS Code as well. And you wouldn't say that JetBrains and VS Code are cloud IDEs because they're basically local programs. So it's very important to have the distinction between a cloud ID and the cloud development environment, or CD as it's now basically popularly called.
So you're defining the IDE as the interface where you type, where you actually interact with the code, versus like what's actually running Bash behind it, what's actually executing the executable you're writing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So the ID, just an interface, the development environment, everything behind it, everything that's running the code.
Does this kind of help solve the problem too of the typical "it worked on my machine" issues? I mean, what are the main reasons why everyone should be moving towards a cloud development environment? What are the benefits compared to running it?
Yeah, so I'm actually glad you phrased it that way, because I had a series of talks last year at conferences called "Solve the But It Works on My Machine" problem with CDEs. So actually, CDEs are, I'd say, the most powerful tool to battle the "it works on my machine" problem. Because the "it works on my machine" problem stems from the fact that your machine and my machine are very, very different. You might have, I don't know, Java 10 installed, I might have Java 12, but we need Java 11 to run the project. So it's a matter of how you configure your development environment. Did you correctly configure it, and can you run any other project? And with CDs, basically what they allow you to do is to have a development environment specifically tailored and configured for that specific project, and not just the project. The specific commit or feature that you're developing will have its own development environment. So for example, if you want to migrate your code from Java 10 to Java 11, for example, you don't want to break everyone's environment. You just create a feature branch, for example, and then in that feature branch you would code on Java 11 and make the migration. But if you want to code back again on the feature branch that has Java 10, it's pretty hard to configure that locally, right? You have to, again, uninstall 11 or configure again your environment to use 10. With cloud development environments, it's just a matter of clicking a button. And when you click the button, we basically Codeanywhere, what we do is we take the configuration of that environment and we spin up the environments tailored to that point of your project. And the important thing here is actually to mention infrastructure as code. So I know in your blog post you talked a lot about IAC and how that's becoming more and more popular now. And IAC as a concept can be well translated into cloud development environments, where you have a configuration that describes everything your project needs to be able to run on the cloud development environment. So for example, in this case, we would declare in the configuration that you need Java 10, for example, and Java 10, I don't know, Postgres, Redis, and anything you might need to run the project. And then when you create the environment, you are guaranteed that the environment will have Java 10 and Redis and Postgres. So that basically eliminates the "but it works on my machine" problem completely, because each developer is guaranteed to work on the same machine. It's just a matter of that the machine is not on your machine, it's on the cloud actually running.
That's the something I've run into time and time again. Back in my days when I was working with JavaScript a lot more, the NVM problem of what version am I in? Did I remember to switch? I'm starting to write bash scripts to tell me to switch as I switch branches. It's starting to get really, really, really complicated. So every time I get in a situation like that, I'm like, okay, I just need to spin up a cloud environment. And I'm really grateful for you guys. Full transparency, I've been a Codeanywhere fan for many years, so I'm very excited to talk to you here today. But this is a security podcast, so I do want to steer the conversation in that direction. Of course, we can talk about the benefits of all of this all day. And yes, definitely IAC crossover. That may be a good entry point in the security conversation. But what are there security benefits to this approach versus the traditional local environment push into dev environment?
Definitely. So I'd say that security is one of the main benefits to CDs, along with the but it works on my machine problem elimination. So security, especially in large enterprises that are very security heavy, I'd say that CDs are much more secure than your local environment. So for example, when running CDs, there's no need for anyone's machine to have any Git credentials, any repo access, any pipeline access from your local machine, because all the code is executed and basically lives in the cloud. All the credentials are stored inside the CD. So that means that there's no security risk in, I don't know, I leave my laptop, for example, in a cafe and someone steals it and goes through my laptop. There's no code actually, no company code ever touching my machine locally. So another thing is that you can configure the security of the CDs running inside the company to anything you like. You can throw VPNs on it, firewalls, whatever you want. You can allow your employees to only access the CD inside a VPN inside the company. So security is much more configurable and much more manageable when everything is running in the company cloud, in the company infrastructure, because then the company itself is responsible and can make all the security decisions it can. Whereas where you have code living locally on your machine, there's, I think, much more threat to, and I don't know, some malicious takeovers from phishing or for example, stuff like that.
Just to play the devil's advocate a little bit here, are there any additional security risks that this will bring? And the one that kind of where my brain goes into this is that it sounds like we have a bit more of a central point of failure in the sense that developers have become real big targets for attackers. We know that they're really targeting repositories or source code because there's secrets and other sensitive information in there. I understand the points of configuration, but are there any risks that this could introduce with companies wanting to adopt it in terms of misconfigurations or central points of failure where now an attacker compromised the developer account but has access to everything?
Yeah, so I'd add on that. There is definitely a additional security risk that is not present in traditional development environments that are on physical computers, and there is a blast radius if someone compromises the cluster where all of those development environments are. So as Thomas said, there is a security benefit of not having anything locally. But again, if security is not adopted in the company's cloud, then there is a blast radius that is much higher or larger than on traditional development environments living locally.
I'd say that also, I didn't mention that the benefit of CDs are also real-time collaboration where you can share the running CD instantly with anyone. So for example, I want to develop a feature that requires attention from the QA, the PM, and I don't know, some designers. You can instantly share your progress by enabling them to view a preview link, for example, of the running code, or actually jump in a real-time collaboration session really easily, because then you could just connect to the same CD and have real-time synchronization of files and code and such. And with that, I'd say that that can pose a more significant security threat if that isn't managed correctly. If you allow developers to share the environment with anyone, you can expose their environment to some outside access that isn't intentional. So in that sense, that's like the most direct, I'd say, security threat. But as Vedran mentioned, if someone were to gain access to the entire cluster where the CDs reside, it could pose a threat to secrets being exposed from users using that cluster.
Oh, right on. So it sounds like if the security team is on top of it and they are already using best practices and already implementing the right approaches, this is going to help them spread those approaches to everyone consistently across the board. But the downside is a misconfiguration once is now a misconfiguration for all.
I'd say that that is much more manageable, because then you know that if your security team has everything covered, you should be covered. It lessens the risk of individual developers to leak any secrets and such. And I'd say that there is one more point to all of this that tightens the security even more. If you have this deployed inside your cluster, you can actually restrict users from using any Docker images that aren't vetted from security. You can only enable, I don't know, you can use Docker image from this tag because it has been completely vetted by security. So that's another point that can reduce the maliciousness of code running in the CDs.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a comment. Is that, of course, I mean, you're never going to have anything that eliminates all security considerations. But if you centralize security, and you're trusting the security people with security and infrastructure people with infrastructure, then that's a better situation than I think where a lot of organizations are, if they're honest, which is they're trusting their developers with security for a lot of things. So I think that the approach is definitely good. But of course, we have to play devil's advocate. So I'm glad I asked my question.
Left philosophy of let's just let the developer do it. Put them in charge. The other thing, benefit I see is one of the bigger problems in code leakage out there that we know from our reports, like State of Secret Sprawl, is people eventually push the wrong repo to the wrong remote. Sometimes that just happens. This seems like it would cut that down significantly, because you're no longer like using the get transport method to get from your computer to the other environment, because you're already in the other environment. Do you see? So I guess it's a question there. Could you still multiple remote from there, or would it just make more sense from a Codeanywhere thing? Just like, all right, this is where this one goes.
If you put it that way, then developer can really do whatever he would do on his local computer. So if the security team, for example, restricts access to other Git repositories, then the probability that he will do such a thing is less significant. But in a way, if a developer has access to other remotes, he can do that as well. So the cloud environment doesn't restrict the developer in that sense. Again, as Thomas said, since the security is centralized, then it is much easier to restrict access to certain systems that are not approved or undesirable.
So, at the just to change it up a little bit, at the start of this episode, you mentioned that you're going to be talking about some products that are actually in beta. So, I guess taking the opportunity now is what's new on the horizon at Codeanywhere? What do you have in the lab that's ready to make its way into the world?
Yeah, so this new platform that we're releasing is heavily focused on these business-to-business cases, because we believe that CDs should become the number one standard for all software companies, and not just software companies, any company that has software developers inside, because of the security implications, because of the it works on my machine problem elimination, and because of actually cost efficiency, because we've seen that it's much more cost efficient to run these cloud development environments than to, let's say, pay for the top of the line computers for developers. And also, this product is heavily Git centric. I don't think we mentioned it. So it's your repository is the central source of truth for all the code that you have, and the environments are spun up from the repository. And it's heavily based on IAC, as we mentioned. So not IAC like infrastructure as code, but the IAC concept where you define everything as code translated into that configuration, enabling the CDs to adapt to the project. Yeah, yeah. Kind of, yeah, but we what we emphasize here is with the product is that we just want to make your local development better, or just move the local development into the cloud and make the developer as efficient as possible. We want to eliminate all the setup requirements, all the time wasted for onboarding and stuff like that, but to keep the Git flow the same as it was. You push to Git, and then the Git CI takes care of the rest. But the development process is much, much more efficient than before.
Right on. So as we're wrapping things up here, I do have kind of a lengthier question because it's really two parts. And that's what I ask you, since we have you here, about the onboarding process. There's two sides of that equation from what I can see. There is the onboarding a new employee into a company that's adopted cloud CD cloud development environments. Sorry, I got a fire truck outside. Give me a second.
No worries.
So there's the first part, which is onboarding employees to a company that's already fully adopted cloud development environments, like the benefits there. We already talked about them a little bit, but I'd just love to hear you enumerate it. And the second one is, how do you get started with this? Like, is there a path? Is there a best practice you would say, like, I am new to cloud development environments. I would love to get involved and like start making that transition, or at least put my toe in the water. So just talk about onboarding in general.
Yeah, so the first point of onboarding new employees into quote unquote CD companies. So onboarding here is really, really easy, and that's what we aim to offer with the platform, where you just need to give repo access to the new employee, and that's it. They just need to push a button or paste the URL into the platform, and they get the environment set up right away, and they can actually start coding right away. Whereas with the previous approach without CDs, you have to get them Git credentials. They have to read through pages of README and documentation, what they need to install locally and stuff like that. So the process of like coming into the company to starting coding is just as simple as giving Git credentials and pushing a button. Whereas with the previous approach is give Git credentials, read through the README, try to set it up, ask for help, and then it goes on for a couple of days. So the onboarding into CDEs is really efficient and really, really fast for new employees. And for companies that want to adopt the CDE approach, what we tend to do with our business-to-business integrations is we ask for them to just dip a toe in the water, give access to one of the teams that has a containerized project already, because we didn't actually mention it before. Codeanywhere as a platform is based on dev containers from Microsoft, and dev containers are heavily based on Docker and Docker Compose. So if you have a containerized application, it really will make the process of transitioning into CDs actually a lot faster. So just give it to one team, they can play around, try to set it up. If it works out for them, you scale it up to the rest of the company. If it's not your cup of tea, we then try to communicate with the team and with the company what went wrong and can we help to adapt it. But most of the companies we've reached out to and the companies that reached out to us were really, really satisfied with the onboarding of new employees and with the efficiency it brings. Because once you get used to it, you just don't go back because it's so efficient and fast.
Well, we're coming to the end of the podcast here. It's been really fascinating. But I did have one last question to start wrapping it up. Is you're called Code from Anywhere, so I'm curious, whereabouts are you guys coding from at the moment?
So we're actually both in Croatia. I'm in Zagreb currently, and Vedran is in Split. So because it's Codeanywhere, we actually try to code from anywhere. So there's no central HQ. We're scattered all around the world. So we actually code from anywhere.
Quick follow up on that. Do you guys keep stats on where people are phoning home from? Like, what's the strangest place you've seen someone like code from?
I don't think we could actually find a metric for that. That wasn't a question that's been raised from our side. But I'd say an interesting anecdote from my side is that a couple of months ago, I had to send my laptop for a keyboard fix. So I just plugged my phone into a monitor and coded from Codeanywhere for a couple of days. So I think that's a cool feature of having your browser ID and connected into a CD.
That I think should be a story on your front page. Code from
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being a part of the Security Repo podcast. I sure learned something today. And yeah, if you're out there thinking about making this jump, and especially if you're in the process of migrating to cloud, this seems like a perfect fit and a perfect time to start embracing the future, because, well, this isn't really the future. This is the now. Doing things locally in those manual setups, that just seems kind of dated at this point. So thanks for being part or telling us about this exciting future and for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.